keep seeing these shadows outside. Better close the curtain. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
I'm okay. How are you? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I did. Wasn't you, was it? Or was your stomach grumbling?
Odd noise. It might be my stomach, yeah. It does some very strange things with my stomach.
Yes, I know. We had a meal recently.
Yes, indeed.
You said something during our last recording about there was some shadows outside your window or something.
Just floating past there. Yeah, like will-o'-the-wisp they were.
Some time ago, and we have an episode on this, strange things, of which one of them was ghosts, but we didn't really explore it to some extent. And I'm interested, because I think the world now knows, people listening to this, that you're a Christian pastor.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do.
And my
indeed.
question is...
The whole world
yes, they
knows.
do, though, don't they?
The whole world.
Ghosts. Have you ever seen one, felt one, spoken to one? And how does it fit in with your faith?
Oh, that's a bit rude, isn't it? How does it fit into my faith?
Is it?
So I think, like we've sort of talked about before, what does it mean? What is a ghost? You know, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a disembodied spirit? Well, I would have to say that most spirits, unless they are inhabiting a human body, are disembodied anyway, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, I would have thought. And please don't write to me on this, but I would have thought that was the case. So what do we mean? Are we talking about a disembodied spirit? Well, I do believe in a spirit world, so I do believe that there are spirits, and I think that I actually think that the spirit world is actually dimensionality. That's what I really think.
This dimension or another dimension?
Another dimension. So what we call the spiritual is actually just different dimensions. And that there are beings that live in different dimensions that we would call spiritual beings.
So are you saying they cross over? And do we cross over into their dimension?
That's a different thing, because we can't exist in their dimension, because we are just made up of this. You know, we're encased. But once your spirit is released from this, then I think that you move into whatever that spiritual world is that I would call dimensionality. How that stacks up, I don't know. It's just a hunch that I have, that actually what the scientists call dimensionality, the ancients would call spirituality, and that there is a crossover there. It may not be an exact crossover. I don't think that we're talking at opposite poles. If we were talking about dimensionality and spirituality, I think they're one and the same thing. One's a scientific term, one's a religious term.
So have you experienced a ghost?
I have experienced a number of things I cannot explain in the rational physical world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Whether that's sensations that you get with the old, I know there's somebody here, and I know that there's someone watching me, and I know that there's a presence here. And probably lots of people would have experienced something like that, where they just think, oh, there's somebody here, or there's somebody watching me, or there's somebody in the room with me, and yet there isn't. Oftentimes I would get a smell, and it's normally a waft of something, and it's normally connected with someone, you know. So tobacco.
Pleasant smells?
Pleasant smell. Tobacco smell, okay. Perfume smell. And you just get a waft of something. There's nobody around you. There's nobody around wearing that perfume. But you just get a waft of it, and people could say, "Well, yeah, that's just clearly carried on the wind, and it's carried on the breeze." And you go, "Yeah, maybe." But I'm in my house, and my windows are shut, my doors are shut. You know, there is a smell of something. Something that I frequently get is shadows, fleeting shadows, out the corners of my eyes, not in my direct vision, but out in my peripheral vision. And I'll go, oh, something's just moved across there, or something's just moved across there. And I often get that. That could just be old age and eyesight failing, perhaps.
It's because your eyes come to a focal point some distance, and your eyes are slightly more relaxed, and therefore will pick up on certain things. To focus on something in front of you, you're blotting out other things. There's this circle that you focus in, and that's why they reckon it comes out of the corners.
So there's stuff like that I've had over the years. There are a number of other things as well, which perhaps we'll tick into. But what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe I think ghosts and spirits for myself are the wrong words. It's energy.
Yeah.
And what surprises me about this whole thing is why people are scared about it.
Mm-hmm.
We've not had legions of ghosts attacking towns, ever. And yet you'll get people convinced that they're out to get them or something like that.
Yes. Unless it's Lord of the Rings.
Unless it's Lord of the Rings, that's different. You talked about dimensionality. We live in 3 dimensions, but there is a 5th dimension to us. But people almost ignore it. It's the mind. So where is your mind? Where does it exist? It's not physically contained within your body. It goes beyond your body. So when you're in a room, and we talked about this before, before you ever shake someone's hand, your minds, souls, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter, are touching. They're mixing. Because energy does that. And I think we talked about before, when you can be in a room with people and you leave and you're drained by them. Oh, it was hard work today.
Yep.
Oh, they just made me feel miserable. Yet you can be in the same room with different people and you feel buoyed up. That's energy. Now, I don't know if you'll accept this or not. I was told that energy can linger.
Yep.
It pools.
Yep.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just memories. And if you're sensitive to it, and not everybody's sensitive, if you're sensitive to it, you could pick up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be something. Now, when you talked about these shadows, I've often seen shadows. I've never felt anything, but I've often heard ringing in my ears, and they reckon it's to do with the left and the right. Which one is a different thing? But once, probably about a year ago, I remember sat down in the lounge, and out the corner of my eye, I felt this need to turn slightly, and I saw a green flash. Very, very clear. And nothing could have done it. It was pitch black over there. It was like a green flash, and it was, when I turned, it was that exact moment. And I've looked into this, and supposedly that is a way in which they can say we're here. I'm not going to say who we are, but spirit. But it's one of those topics that some will instantly shut off. I've had conversations with some evangelicals who say, no, not going to talk about that. Demons, all that. And I thought, no, okay. The question is, do we interact with them? And can we have some kind of a two-way, I won't say communication, a knowing? Is that possible? And I'm going to throw that back to you now.
I do think it's incredibly possible to know it. And I find it quite fascinating that Christianity is a spiritual belief, right?
Yes.
It's an understanding that there is that the God-man that we worship, when he rose from the dead, was resurrected into a different type of body than the one that he died in, because the body that he rose in could exit a tomb, could enter closed doors, closed rooms, and could appear at different times and disappear at different times, like he stepped out of our time into a different dimension and then stepped back in at a different time in a different place from that dimension. That's why I find it strange that a Christian would almost distance himself from the spiritual. I think there's 2 camps you can fall into. You can overemphasize the spiritual at the neglect of the physical, and you can underemphasize the spiritual and promote the physical. So I think that there's a middle road here, and certainly the Christian belief is a spiritual belief. We believe in God the Father. So let's have a look at the Trinity. God the Father, who is spirit, and we believe in the Holy Spirit that is one of the same kind, i.e. exactly the same as Jesus. He's one of the same kind, as if you look at the Greek. It's an allos spirit, one of the same kind, not a heteros spirit. So it's exactly the same kind as Christ. Yeah. So the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of Christ. And all wrapped up, we call that the Trinity, right? So everything apart from the God-man is spiritual. Everything is spiritual. I find it difficult to understand why a Christian wouldn't understand that they are spiritual beings who inhabit a physical body. You know, we are spirit beings. We are a soul who inhabits a body. We're not a body that has a soul. Yeah, not just. And there are some people that are hugely concerned about, and I understand occult, dabbling in evil and all the rest of it. I understand that, and I think to myself, yeah, if I was you, I would avoid that like the plague for lots of reasons. But to deny its existence, I think is not Christian. It's very Christian to accept that it exists. You've only got to look at the first book of Samuel, and King Saul goes to find a medium, and when he finds a medium, what he's looking for is for her to call up the prophet Samuel, who's died, so that he can get some advice. And so she does exactly that. She calls up Samuel from the dead. That's in 1 Samuel 28, verse 13. The king says to her, "Don't be afraid, but what have you seen?" And the woman replies to Saul, "I've seen a divine being," or in the Hebrew, that's gods. "I've seen gods coming up from the ground." And he says to her, "What about his appearance?" So she says, "An old man is coming up and he's wrapped in a robe." And Saul realised it was Samuel, and he bowed his face toward the ground and kneeled down. And then it goes on in verse 15. Samuel, so the dude that's just been called up from the dead, from the underworld, says to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul replies, "I'm troubled. The Philistines are against me." And Samuel, who's a little bit miffed by this, in verse 16 says, "Why are you asking me? Now the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy." So Saul has this fibbing conversation with an apparition. Now, I would call that a spirit. I don't know what you would call it, but I would call it a spirit, in my understanding of what a spirit is. Somebody who has passed away, who is no longer in this world, but who can still be contacted and who can be summoned and who can be spoken to. Now, do I think that's a good thing? I don't think it's an area that you should be playing around in for lots of reasons, because it's an area that we don't know enough about. But I don't think that it's something that doesn't happen. I think it happens. And I think there are people that are very attuned to it. And you know what? I wouldn't be at all surprised. And again, this is me just speaking as me, not as any Christian teacher. I wouldn't be at all surprised that there are people that are very, very attuned to this and who almost can't avoid it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and if you are a believer in God and that God created everything and God has made this world, and that we all have that essence in us of God. We may not, because of free will, choose to do anything about it, but we have the essence of the divine in us. To say that some people, therefore, are not part of God's creation because they are mediums strikes me a bit slightly flawed in the logic. You'll know that there are the gifts, the spiritual gifts that all Christians can have. And I have to say, I'm not a Christian. But there are spiritual gifts, of which one is laying on hands and one is foretelling, but only if you're Christian. A Christian would say, if they're not Christian, you can't trust it. So on one hand, they're saying, yes, we know it happens, but not unless you are one of us. Well, then that's putting a finger up to God's creation, because everything on the planet. And there are no doubt people here, just like there have been prophets in the past, and there are people, mediums, as you said. And there's one in Luke 16, isn't there? 1:16-19. Once there was a rich man who used to dress and dies. It's Lazarus and the rich man.
That's the story of Lazarus and the rich man. Yeah.
Now, it's interpreted by a lot of Christians that, because right at the end, it says, if you were to send somebody from the dead, they wouldn't believe it. And you can interpret that various ways. But I saw a video of a woman, she's an evangelical and she's a medium, and said that to me tells me that there are mediums. It's written in the gospel. But she admitted, but around her, no one else seemed to accept that, because instantly there's a wall against anything that could talk to ghosts or see things that the majority can't have. You couldn't trust it. And it's understandable why people would think that. Absolutely. But I know people who can speak and do have communications with spirits. Whether you believe that or not, that's for the individual. But surely there would be need for it, if nothing else, just to have comfort for people. In my own experience, I've never come across a spirit that is meant to do us harm. I have never come across anybody who says that they can talk to spirit and they're there for harm. They're all there for good. Now, you could say it's very twee and it's very misguided. That's fine. I personally understand that God is good. I don't follow a religion, and therefore creation is good, and therefore people's communication with spirit, which is closer to God than we are, is good. I'd rather believe that than they're devils trying to get you and trip you up. And I don't want to live in fear, so I'm not. I can understand why people would fear that because they're told to fear that.
I think that the medieval Dark Ages picture of the little devils chasing you around is a very poor illustration of what the spirit world actually is. I don't go with that at all. Do I think that there are malevolent spirits? Absolutely. I do think that. So I don't think that every spirit is there to do you good. In the same way as I don't think every human being is there to do you good. There are human beings who are good. There are human beings who are pretty foul. And I would say that the spirit that inhabits a foul human being, when the body decays and dies, goes somewhere. So does that spirit go straight to this place called hell? I suspect not. That's not to say that there's not a place that is a complete separation from God, but I'm not sure that that's at that time. I don't think that comes into play just yet in the way things work. So I do think that there are malevolent spirits. I do think that there are neutral spirits, and there are probably very positive spirits. You know, there is the angelic realm. The angelic realm is all spiritual beings, the celestial. So I think that they are very positive spirits. But I do think that there are malevolent forces in the world as well. And I think it's the malevolent forces that will often underpin the bad actions of humanity, because I do believe that there is a power behind the throne, something beyond us that actually directs us.
And I won't disagree with you, because although I said I think there's only good spirits, I think that's because I choose to attract good spirits. Light attracts light. Dark attracts dark. And if you are doing shameful acts, you're going to attract shameful people, and you're going to go spiraling down. Okay, fair enough. But I think we all have the free will inside us to make that choice. I mean, I've known people come from very difficult, poor, criminal backgrounds, but they've not been criminal, and they've not been deficit theorizers. You can't blame the people around you, but very easily you can say, well, I had no other alternative and blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about the likes of people, you know, the film One Good German, and it was about the Nazis, the Nazi era, and was there anybody who ever stood up to the Nazis? Well, yes, there were, but most people couldn't afford to do that. And, you know, if you're in a situation like in certain countries where it's a tyranny, and if you spoke out, you and your family would suffer, well, then you just put up with it. I mean, that's the basis of 1984. Winston at the end says, I love Big Brother. Even though he's fought against it, it's better just to say that to move on. And I think, yes, there's good spirits if you choose to attract them. But obviously, there's going to be dark energies if you are going to go that way. And I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. And I think one of the points that you made earlier about that you see it as energy and that places retain energy, I think in my experience, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. There are places that I've walked into over the years where as soon as you walk into the house, there is something almost palpable in the house, in the room, which is, it's almost like absorbed into the fabric of the building. Yeah. And you can sense it. And, you know, I have noticed that various times when I've been in places. Well, one place particularly that comes to mind, I was doing a search warrant in there, and I was asked to search a particular room, and every time I stepped across the threshold, the temperature plummeted. And as soon as I stepped back out, the temperature was normal again, every time. And it made me feel really uncomfortable. And somebody else went in there and did the search in there. And I went upstairs and searched the room above it.
Did they feel the temperature go down?
No, nothing. They didn't feel anything. And so I searched the room above it, and the room above it was not quite as bad. But in working out what had gone on in this house, that room in that house was where children were abused. And there was something within that room that was stuck within the fabric of the room that I could discern. And it was very strange. And, you know, as you moved further away from the room, the feeling got lesser and lesser. But as soon as you stepped into it, it just whoosh, dropped. Very odd feeling.
See, I've often wondered, for some reason, through a glass darkly is a phrase that comes to mind. So you imagine you look through a frosted glass and you can't quite see what is clear. It's shadows moving. And I think some people just see a door. Some people can see frosted glass, some people can see it clearly. Most people just see the door and therefore deny what may be beyond it because they don't see it. Some people can get a little glimpse, and this could be, I suppose, ourselves seeing shadows and orbs and stuff like that, sensing temperature drops, buzzing in ears. But then there are some who aren't looking with their eyes. They're looking with what's known as, well, it depends on the tradition, third eye, whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean we have a third eye, we're not cyclops, but it's just the ability for the mind to see stuff that the physical eyes do not. So, for instance, we only see a certain spectrum. Now, I've worked with a girl who has been medically shown that she can see colours other people can't. So not everybody has the same rods and cones as most people. Some are colourblind. I've said this before. How do you explain colour to a colourblind person or a blind person? But there are some people who plainly will see things that no one else does.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've got no doubt about it. I see it almost as a veil. Think of a net curtain. And there are some times when that net curtain is pulled so tight that you can almost see through it, and that's sometimes the sense that I get, that if I could just reach, I would reach into something that I can't actually see in front of me. It's quite a strange sensation, but it's definitely happened to me. And to say, there've been so many things over the years which I've just seen or heard, that I think, there's no doubt in my mind that there is something going on around me that I cannot see, that I cannot rationalise, that I cannot explain, but I know is there. So as I sit here in this room, I know there is a myriad of stuff going on around me. I know that that's happening around me, but I can't see it. But I know it.
How do you mean?
Because I know that there is more to my reality than me sat in this room.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So everything is as it is, as I see it, because I live in a material world made up of atoms pushed together to give me this. It's almost like it's all an illusion in some regards, that it's, that nothing's real. Everything, if you were to break it down to its molecular structure, you could put your hands through stuff,
Well, the majority of things is space.
So when you think about that, if you have the ability to be in a body that can weave its own molecular structure through everything else in what we would call the scientific world, well, I mean, goodness me, it's an endless flow of atoms, quarks, whatever. And then to be able to sort of bring all of that back together again and step back into a different aspect of what we would call reality. I think it's quite fascinating. It's certainly from a Christian perspective. And I think you talked about the comment that you made regarding only if you're Christian should you believe people type of thing. If it's a Christian doing something, then it's fine. If it's not, then it's wrong. I'm probably a little bit more sceptical about that. I'd say even if it's a Christian do it, you should be very mindful of it, because
yes, especially in this age.
Yeah, because they can get it horribly wrong as well. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to any of that. I think that the key for being Christian is where your focus is, and your focus has got to be on Christ. That's it. And all the rest of it, interesting though it is, should not be your primary focus. Your primary focus as a spiritual being is to know Christ. And so the more you bring your own spirit to dwell on the Spirit, and through his Spirit on him, that's where everything starts to fall into place. And the rest of it just becomes, oh yeah, of course it happens. But it's fluff on the outside. It's not what we need to worry about. And I think some people get too bogged down. And so what they do is they're supposed to be aiming here, but they get caught here, and they should be aiming for Christ.
Yeah.
From a Christian perspective.
Well, again, you're similar to a lot of other faiths. So, for instance, Hinduism believes in God, and God manifested in human form multiple times. They even accept Buddha as having done so. Krishna, Rama, so many. And they came down to help people. And in fact, Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, the only way to God is through me. It's very similar. What I don't get is why so many people want to ignore that. It almost belittles ourselves to say that we're it and there's nothing else beyond us. When
I think it's
we know
arrogance.
Well, absolute arrogance. But saying that, that's changing because science has humbled itself recently, because it's admitting now half the stuff it's been so adamant about, they're not too sure. And a lot of the stuff at CERN recently, some of the breakthroughs, they're having to re-evaluate what it means to be at the atomic level. I don't fully understand it. So I think we've gone beyond the age of new atheism and concrete. And as you said before, it's robbed us of what we truly are, because we have a very strong spiritual side. Just thinking something is spiritual.
Well,
why would people want?
What's the mind? We talked about the mind, right? What is all of that?
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, so there's so much more, mate, than what we see. And this is fortunately, you and I were blessed with very interesting vessels to carry our spirits around in.
We chose wisely, Steve.
You know, and but yeah, there's just so much more to it. So much more to it, and I think that you should keep a very open mind to these things.
So are we then saying that we believe that there are ghosts and that they can interact with us? I think I am.
Yeah, I'm saying that I absolutely believe that there is a spiritual world, and I believe that, and Scripture teaches that the spiritual world can be conversed with. Whether you should, whether you shouldn't, whether it's a good thing or a foolish thing, well, that's a matter depending on your point of faith. You know, and I know what my views are around that, but, you know, definitely. And if that's what you mean by ghost, then there are indeed ghosts.
Cool. All right. Great topic and good conversation, Steve.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Ta-ta for now.
You look after yourself. TTFN.